Hello everyone, this is part 2 of What If Naruto Was Like the Sage of Six Paths, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Damn it, Naruto. Stop moving around so much. The sound of limbs slicing through air and the occasional grunt of exertion echoed through the small training room on the eastern edge of the fire temple as two combatants constantly moved back and forth in a graceful dance of punches and kicks. Maybe you just need to move faster, Sora. A grinning blonde ducked under another high kick before gracefully sliding through his opponent's legs. Before he could remove the other combatant's base though, the other boy jumped up, aiming for a heavy axe kick. At the last moment though, he suddenly found himself falling faster than he expected, throwing him off balance and leading to him falling in a crumpled heap on the ground. That's another point to me, Sora. The dark blue-haired boy looked up with a pained groan at the hand outstretched in front of him before taking it with a few mumbled curses. How many does that make now? 5-2. Sora scowled at the grinning blonde before pushing the hand away in irritation. I would have had you that time if you hadn't used your gravity manipulation. It's cheating. Naruto just chuckled as he patted his friend on the back. All's fair in love and war, as Chiraku-senpai says. Sora just scoffed as a smile finally broke out on his face. Yeah, and what would Chiraku-senpai know about love? At that both boys burst out laughing, the joyous sound bouncing around the small training area. Oh. At the sound of a third voice, both boys immediately froze before shakily turning their heads to look into the amused expression of the very man they had been talking about. And what does Chiraku-senpai know about love? Outside, two monks were passing by the training ground when they heard two loud gulps followed swiftly by two even louder thumps. The monks simply looked at each other once before sighing and continuing on with the same thought. Naruto and Sora again. Sorry, Chiraku-senpai. Back inside the training ground, Sora and Naruto were rubbing their aching heads while Chiraku was the picture of serene innocence, despite the shakuju he was subtly resealing into a pouch on his hip. Now boys, final bell is about to ring, we don't want you all sweaty before you go to bed, you know how Chigasu would feel about that. Both boys nodded immediately with slight fear in their eyes. They knew exactly how the old grumpy keeper of the temple would feel about that, and the mere thought had them rubbing various phantom pains. Alright, Chiraku-senpai, but first I gotta show you something. The older monk simply raised an eyebrow at the excited blonde. A year living in the temple really hadn't done all that much to calm his energetic spirit. Would this thing happen to be a certain technique Master Chukaku has forbidden you from using in any of the indoor training grounds? The blonde smiled sheepishly as he rubbed the back of his neck, glaring at Sora as the other boy chuckled behind his hand. He was remembering the other times Naruto had supposedly mastered the more powerful techniques at his disposal. No, come on, Chiraku-senpai, I swear I have it this time. I know what I was doing wrong. The older monk stared at the whisked child for a few moments as Naruto bravely met his gaze before sighing and gesturing outside. Fine, but not inside, we don't need a repeat of last time. As if to stress his point, he looked across the open field they were entering to a large hole in the wall on the far side. The result of Naruto's latest attempt at his technique. Not gonna happen, just watch me. With an excited cry, Naruto dashed across the fields to face one of the pre-prepared training dummies before adopting a standard fighting stance. Sora dropped to the ground, getting comfy for something he was sure was going to be hilarious while Chiraku watched more intently. Naruto relaxed himself, concentrating on the pool of energy deep inside himself, drawing it out and directing it through his body. He allowed it to build up inside him but controlled it from becoming too strong. He had learned the consequences of that the hard way. Finally, he pushed the chakra to his eyes and hand at the same time, simultaneously bringing one arm up so his palm faced outwards in one smooth motion. Shinra tensei. Sora and Chiraku could only watch on amazed as the training dummy was summarily obliterated by the veritable wall of gravitational forces slamming into it. It soared across the field, flying out of sight over the roof of the next building over, raining stuffing and bits of hay down as it went. Unfortunately, that wasn't the only thing that went flying. Whoa! Almost as fast as the training dummy was blasted away, Naruto was sent flying back in the opposite direction. However, he came to a much quicker stop, embedded in a wall a few feet away. Ergush. Like a marionette with its strings cut, he flopped to the ground, leaving a surprisingly accurate imprint of his body in the wooden wall. A few seconds of silence passed before Sora burst out into an uncontrollable fit of laughter. Even Chiriku had to stifle a few chuckles before walking over and helping his student up from the ground. I'm impressed, Naruto, you finally managed to direct the force of the technique, although you might need to work on counteracting that force on yourself. Naruto just nodded limply, his eyes looking slightly distant as he gazed up at the three sets of his senpai looking down at him. Soon after, Sora came over and gave Naruto a shoulder to lean on, but not before he finished his laughing fit. Even so, while he found his friend's misfortune as funny as any good friend would, he had to be impressed by the sheer power behind the attack. He certainly wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of it. Alright, Chiriku-senpai, I'll help Naruto to his room. We were going to have another spar, but I don't think he's in that condition right now. Chiriku just nodded once before turning and retiring to his own quarters, even as the evening bell began to toll around the temple. Sora hefted Naruto up so that his arm was slung around his friend's shoulders and began walking in the direction of the living quarters. You're always doing this, you know. His only response from the blonde was a groan and a small chuckle which made the monk in training smile. You're always trying to do the impossible. Again, he didn't get much of a response from his injured friend. Even so, you'll go ahead and try it over and over again until you get it right, won't you? He looked down and found Naruto grinning weakly up at him, a knowing glint in his squinted eyes. And then you'll try and one-up me. Sora chuckled at that but didn't deny Naruto's statement. What can I say? You're a bad influence on me. And stop doing that, you look like Master Chukaku when you narrow your eyes. Naruto just nodded wearily before allowing his head to droop again. By now they had reached Naruto's room, and with a bit of maneuvering on Sora's part he managed to slide open the fusuma and lie Naruto down on his futon. Get some rest and we'll see tomorrow how the score turns out. He looked around when he got no reply but saw that Naruto was already asleep. Sora just chuckled as he slipped out of the room quietly. His friend was a real idiot sometimes. Sora, this is Naruto, he'll be staying at the temple with us for the foreseeable future and I want you to show him around the temple. Blonde hair peeked out nervously from behind Chukaku's robes, catching the young trainee monk's attention. Ohio, I'm Naruto. The blue-haired youth just stared at the boy for a few moments before tentatively holding out his own hand as they shook. It was an obviously awkward scene, neither child having had good experiences with people their own age, or in Sora's case, no experience period. Good. I know you two will become the best of friends, now I have some paperwork to do, so run along. With that, the elderly monk turned on a heel and calmly trotted away from the scene. Sora, what's it like being a monk? Sora just blinked at the whisked boy before looking away at a wall. I don't really know, I've always lived here so I don't know much else, but it's nice. Naruto nodded at that with a small smile as his posture became less tensed. So what do you do for fun? Sora blinked again, finding this very different to talking with the monks who were always very reserved and self-assured. Well, we have breakfast in the morning followed by meditation and training, then lunch then. Naruto waved his hands in front of him, cutting the boy off. No, I mean like for fun. In your spare time and stuff. When you're not training or anything. Sora frowned as he looked at Naruto. This was a surreal experience for the boy, that was for sure. Well, the library is always available for recreational reading. Naruto blinked once before hanging his head down, a metaphorical cloud suddenly appearing over his head. That sounds so boring. Sora suddenly gained a tick mark over his eye as he slammed Naruto over the head with his covered arm, his eye twitching in irritation. The monk's pursuit of enlightenment is not boring. It's a spiritual journey into one's soul, and as such, Sora trailed off as he saw Naruto miming along to his words with his hand with a decidedly unimpressed look on his face. Like I said, boring. The blonde flopped to the ground, adopting an incredibly poor attempt at a meditative pose. I mean, what's the big deal with sitting like this anyway? Sora's eye began to twitch again, suddenly regretting getting lumped with this obvious idiot. Suddenly though, a superior smirk appeared over his face as he too got onto the floor, adopting the correct pose for meditation with his palms facing up, his hands in loose fists and his knuckles touching. Well, Chiriku-senpai says that it takes the utmost skill and concentration to properly meditate, obviously such things are beyond you. At that, Naruto looked up in annoyance, his own tick developing over one eye. Oh yeah, I bet it's not so hard, I could meditate way better than you could. He looked over the position Sora was in and quickly adjusted his own posture to match. If Sora hadn't been so annoyed with the blonde, he might have been impressed at Naruto's first attempt. Instead, he simply raised a haughty eyebrow in mild contempt. Amateur. When he didn't get any response, he looked up to see Naruto's head turned away, his eyes closed in a mockery of meditation. It was obviously an exaggerated way of ignoring Sora. The blonde quickly found a fist buried in his skull and an angry Sora above him. Hey, don't ignore me. From a nearby window, Chukaku watched the whole scene with his mouth hidden by his sleeve. A mild chuckle escaped his lips as he observed the two boys' interaction. He knew it was a good idea to introduce the two, for the other monk's amusement if nothing else. Chukaku looked up from his desk with a fond, nostalgic smile as he thought back on the last year since Naruto had joined the temple. It was quickly marred with a frown, however, as he once again picked up the piece of paper he had been reading. He sighed as he placed it to one side, quickly drafting up the same response he had written every time he received a letter like this. Finishing with a flurry as he signed his name, he sealed it into an envelope ready to give to the passing mail nin the next morning. He sighed again as his gaze drifted over to the seal on the envelope the message had come from, the seal of the Hokage. He would change the wording every time, sometimes offering things in return, but the gist was always the same: bring Naruto back to Konoha. In the same manner, his answer never changed from a firm and resounding no. As long as Naruto was under the roof of the fire temple, Chukaku would see he never had to return to his old home. The young blonde had told him about his life there after some coaxing, and the elderly monk was appalled. He had worked out from the boy's treatment and the village's vehement requests for him to be returned just what he was, as well as from his appearance just who he was, although it was speculation until he could find evidence. Even so, he found the village's blatant hatred of a child horrific, especially considering the burden that was already on the poor boy's shoulders. What made it all the better was that he had the power, the authority, and the influence to keep Naruto here, whether the Hokage or anybody else had anything to say about it or not. The fire temple was firmly under his control as head monk, and in turn he reported directly to the fire daimyo, nobody else. He had known the man since he was just a baby in his mother's arms and had always made sure to be in his favor. What's more, the man knew better than to upset the person who controlled his protection detail, the 12 Guardian Shinobi. Of course, it was always Naruto's decision. If the boy ever actually wanted to return to his old home, Chukaku would not stop him. He would of course be sad to see the boy leave. The temple had been a much brighter place since the boy was introduced. However, he had never seen any indication Naruto wanted to leave. In fact, the boy seemed incredibly happy here, like he had found a smile long since thought forgotten. Chukaku was suddenly broken from his musings as he heard a loud commotion somewhere outside. He moved to the window, a troubled frown creasing his already wrinkled brow as he spotted what looked like a fire on the other side of the temple. However, it was when he saw the first flicker of red and felt a malevolent aura wash over the area that he immediately rushed from the room. Naruto's short-lived sleep was troubled, filled with orange fur and blood-red eyes before he awoke with a start. Cold sweat covered his body, making his robes stick to his skin uncomfortably as he panted. He took a deep breath before raising himself onto his elbows. Glancing over at the clock on his wall, he noted it had only been about half an hour since Sora had brought him to his room. More than that, though, there was a presence in the air, weighing down on him like an invisible weight. Getting to his feet, he was shocked to see flames out his window. His eyes widened even as his feet carried him out of his room and towards the fire. He got there to see it was one of the smaller temple buildings. The walls and roof were up in flames. The orange and yellow tendrils of fire were licking at the sky as smoke billowed out from the building in choking sheets. There was a gathering of monks, some attempting to douse the flames with buckets and water ninjutsu, while others seemed to crowd around something else. He took a few hesitant steps toward the second group until he felt a familiar hand grip his shoulder. No, Naruto, you have to stay away, it's dangerous. He looked up to see Chukaku, his normally serene features marred by worry and concern. Suddenly a monk was tossed out of the group like a ragdoll, landing not far from them. It distracted Chukaku long enough for Naruto to break out of his grip and rush forward. He didn't want to be treated like a child. This was his home now and he would protect it with his life if he had to. Ignoring Chukaku's desperate cries, Naruto barged his way past two monks only to freeze in surprise at what he saw. Sora stood at the center of a ring of monks, except it wasn't the Sora Naruto had known for the past year. He was hunched over, a crazed expression in his eyes as an evil grin lifted the corners of his mouth. The arm that he usually kept covered was a mottled red, spiky protrusions jutting out at random, and the fingers had become more like claws. Worst of all, his entire body was enshrouded by a cloak of intense red chakra, bubbling like it was alive. 3 tails slowly swayed back and forth behind him. Sora. Naruto's cries only served to draw the boy's attention to him, his now red and slitted eyes locking firmly on the blonde. However, there was no recognition there, only an insane bloodthirsty glee, like a predator spotting its next meal. Naruto took a step back as he saw the pure malice behind the boy's eyes. It wasn't Sora, it just couldn't be. Naruto, stop. The blonde just barely heard Chiriku's voice along with a few others, no doubt monks concerned with his safety. He ignored them anyway, rushing forward towards the creature his friend had become. He didn't make it within 3 meters of him before a malicious red tail swatted him away from the side, moving faster than he could even follow. He landed a few meters away, his clothing ripped and torn in a few places, and he knew there were a few spots that would bruise the following morning. Even so, he picked himself up on shaking legs, a desperate look in his eye as he looked at his friend. Sora had turned away from him, obviously having lost interest in the prey that put up barely any fight. Naruto's features set into a determined mask as he watched another monk get battered away by those tails. He set his feet into a solid stance, already drawing up the chakra from inside of him and directing it to both his eyes and his hands. Discreetly, he placed his other hand behind him, pointing in the opposite direction as he finally released the pent-up chakra. Banshu Tenon. Naruto immediately felt the pull on his body like gravity had been temporarily inverted, but the hand he had behind him kept him glued in place. Sora, on the other hand, was in no such luck as he suddenly found himself flying through the air towards Naruto, unable to react in time to do anything about it. The blonde had already pulled his hand into a fist, ready to knock some sense into his friend. However, at the last moment it unfurled. The possessed Sora blinked in confusion as he suddenly found himself wrapped up in an iron-like grip. Naruto's hands were firmly wrapped around his friend's back, his chin over one shoulder. The tails behind him waved uncertainly for a moment, as lost as the one guiding them. Please, Sora, I don't understand what is going on, but please stop this. A solitary tear rolled down Naruto's cheek, evaporating as it touched the cloak of pure chakra covering Sora. Just stop this, let me help you. He hugged tighter, ignoring the pain as the malevolent chakra began to burn his skin and rip away at his already tattered clothing. Stop it. Suddenly Sora seemed to freeze, the tails stopping in mid-sway as if caught in some invisible giant's hand. Ever so slowly the long red tails began to shrink back into the cloak, even as the cloak itself slowly began to leak off of Sora's body. The chakra seemed to twitch in midair before slowly being absorbed into Naruto. As it did so, the burns and bruises across Naruto's body began to heal so fast the monks around them could actually see it happening. Finally, when the entire cloak had disappeared and Sora's features had returned to normal, the two boys collapsed to the ground, Naruto still clutching Sora tightly to him. Chiriku and Chukaku immediately rushed over to see if they were okay. Aside from Sora's intense chakra exhaustion and a few burns across his skin, they were perfectly fine, just unconscious. Chukaku let out a long sigh of relief as he looked down at the two before turning to the assembled monks. He was simply glad there had been no casualties. However, he would still have to explain that to the rest of the monks tomorrow, and he knew that would be exhausting. Not to mention Naruto was going to be asking questions too, and Chukaku was sure he would be hard-pressed to answer them. Alright, start putting out those fires, we'll begin repairing the damages tomorrow, for now get some rest. As soon as the murmuring dies down and the monks began to disperse, he took another look at the two boys on the ground. How can two boys so young bear such a heavy burden? Drip. Naruto felt strangely at peace, the air was still but not humid or uncomfortable. Drip. The ground beneath him, while hard, was not inherently painful, he had grown used to relatively hard bedding anyway. Drip. There were no aches very his body like he had expected there to be. Drip. He gently moved a hand up his body, feeling for where he knew he had been burned by that foul chakra. Drip. Strangely, all he felt was his normal smooth skin, not even any bandages. Drip. Likewise, his clothing seemed fresh, there was no noticeable damage. Drip. In fact. Drip. Shut up. Naruto blinked as his voice echoed out through. Wherever he was, it was certainly not the temple, that was for sure. He got to his feet, once again marveling that he didn't feel at all hurt and his skin was unblemished. He looked around, his steely purple eyes taking in his strange surroundings with a frown. As far as he could tell, it seemed to be the basement level of some kind of industrial building. He had found himself in one once when he was exploring in Konoha, except the one he found himself in was much cleaner. Pipes ran the length of the ceiling, disappearing off into the darkness in both directions of the seemingly endless corridor. There were many of them, but one in particular caught his eye as it was much larger than the rest. It was also the only one that was leaking, obviously the cause of the irritating dripping. Sure enough, he watched as a single drop of some foul red liquid gathered at the bottom of the pipe into a droplet before falling to the floor. Whatever it was, Naruto knew better than to touch it. When it made contact with the floor, it sizzled for a moment, eating away at the ground. However, more amazingly, the floor seemed to immediately repair itself, the small hole disappearing like it had never been there. He watched this repeat 3 times before tearing his gaze away. It was oddly hypnotic. Having nothing better to do, Naruto began to walk down the corridor. It didn't seem to matter which way he took, they looked exactly the same. Every so often he would reach another leak in the pipe, the only indicator he was actually moving at all. Finally, though, he reached a fork. He blinked, looking down both identical passageways before shrugging and heading right. After maybe another 5 minutes of walking without any indication he was getting anywhere, Naruto finally stopped. He liked to imagine that a year in a temple had somewhat calmed him and given him some semblance of patience. However, the truth was shinra tensei. The area around Naruto erupted in an explosion of pure gravitational forces, his hands outstretched to either side to evenly distribute the blast. However, when he opened his eyes, he nearly fell to his knees in shock and despair. The walls were completely unharmed. There wasn't even a single indication his technique had done any damage, not even the pipes seemed affected, they just kept dripping away. However, Naruto did manage to spot one strange thing out of it. Just to test it, he began to build up chakra within his body again, feeling the flow in his pathways as it circulated at a faster rate under his direction. His ear twitched as he looked up at the pipes above him. It was unmistakable. Whatever was flowing through the smaller pipes sped up when he began to gather chakra and likewise slowed down when he harmlessly allowed it to disperse. Weird. With an irritated sigh, Naruto just resigned himself to walking along the pathway. However, no sooner than he put one foot in front of the other, he felt it. That same malicious aura that Sora had been emitting. His eyes widening in panic, Naruto took off at a sprint down the corridor in the direction he felt the presence coming from. If Sora was having another attack, he needed to be there for his friend. After another 5 minutes of running, as Naruto became increasingly worried, he finally turned a corner only to skid to a stop. In front on him was a massive room, a change from the otherwise cramped hallways, but the most noticeable feature was the enormous metal gate spanning the length of one wall and behind it. Naruto couldn't be sure. Darkness stretched on beyond the gate, showing no visible floor or ceiling, making it seem like Naruto was staring out into nothingness. Of course, it didn't stay that way for long. 2 enormous eyes cracked open in the darkness as Naruto stepped into the room. Their slitted black pupils framed by red stared through him, piercing him with the gaze. They were followed by an equally large mouth, teeming with teeth as it stretched into a horrific facsimile of a grin. Each gleaming white tooth was taller than Naruto was himself and looked like they could tear through just about anything. So my jailer finally honors me with his presence and with a gift of my own chakra, no less. How very. The 2 massive eyes narrowed slightly as whatever invisible head they were attached to lowered to better look at Naruto, simultaneously pulling in a deep breath of air. Thoughtful. Large white claws, much bigger than the teeth, appeared at the base of the cage door, gently stroking the bars with a deafening ring of metal. While a terrifying sight, it did give Naruto the impression that whatever this thing was, he was safe as long as he stayed away from the bars. Are you not going to speak ninjan? It has been so long since I have had the pleasure of company, 8 miserable years in fact. Naruto gulped, trying to hide just how frightened he was of this thing, whatever it was. Demon was the first word that sprung to mind, but upon thinking of that word, Naruto suddenly remembered his life in Konoha, those quiet whispers when they thought he wasn't listening. They too had called him demon, but Master Chukaku had told him they simply didn't understand him, and it was their ignorance that led to their hatred. Hello, I'm Naruto. The great eyes once again focused on the small child, the head lowering even further so that they were almost at eye level with one another. It wasn't that hard considering Naruto was about as tall as the diameter of the eyes. I know your name, Ninjan. I listened to you shout it out every time you made that foolish declaration of becoming Hokage. The creature seemed to spit the word Hokage like it left a sour taste in its mouth. By its voice Naruto would assume it was male, but it was so loud and booming he couldn't really tell either way. What's yours? Suddenly the creature laughed, a deep, bellowing chuckle that resounded in the small space, at least small in comparison to itself. However, the laugh contained no humor, it was more mocking than anything. Just because you have those eyes, ninja, do not presume you can hold a candle to their original owner. The creature slammed its remaining invisible paw down somewhere in the darkness beyond the cage, the boom resounding through the room. Its eyes narrowed dangerously as Naruto didn't even flinch, its mouth once again stretching into a sickening grin. Do you not fear me, ninja? Its voice was low, like a soft grumble. Despite its sheer volume in Naruto's ears, it also didn't particularly sound like a question. Naruto stood firm though, quickly shaking his head defiantly. Master Chukaku says that fear is the natural human response to something we don't understand. But if we don't choose to try and understand, it will lead to ignorance and unfounded hatred. Then that hatred will only lead to more pain, suffering and fear. The creature in the cage almost seemed amused by this, its head rising up into the darkness even as its eyes never left Naruto's unmoving form. Don't hope to believe you could ever even try to understand me, ninja. I am a being beyond your comprehension. The culmination of millennia of hatred and rage. Naruto looked down at that, breaking eye contact with the creature for the first time since meeting it. Master Chukaku told me that nobody is born hating. It is only their experiences, their losses, their sufferings that drive them to hate, and that hatred is only the most extreme expression of love. He looked back up and saw the creature regarding him with what might have been curiosity, it might also have been contempt. Whatever it was gone before Naruto could really see, and the creature was lowering its head back down, its eyes narrowed but firmly fixed on the blonde. After a few moments of tense silence it finally spoke out in a deep but low tone. For now you may call me QB, now begone ninja, this idiotic conversation has already bored me. Naruto suddenly felt a tug from behind as if he had been snagged by some invisible rope before he was violently yanked back into darkness. However, before he left he caught a glimpse of the QB's full form, that of an enormous nine-tailed fox. Ruto. Naruto. Naruto. The voice seemed to echo in his head like he was underwater. Wah. The blonde wearily blinked his eyes open, wincing as he managed to stare directly into a ceiling light. His eyes clenched shut as it felt like he was being repeatedly smacked over the head. No, wait. Ah, what was that for, old man? The blonde glared angrily at the wizened monk, who only offered an innocent smile in return, Shakuja returning to its place behind him. Good, you're up, Naruto-kun, we were beginning to worry. Naruto merely glared at Chukaku, rubbing his head as he mumbled a few choice curses under his breath. You got a funny way of showing it, master. His eyes not even opening for a second, the older monk began reached around his back for the staff again. What was that, my boy? The blonde immediately had his hands up in front of him, and strained grin in his face as he attempted to placate the irritated monk. Nothing. Nothing, master. Chukaku just continued to smile, but with a sigh of relief Naruto noted the staff had once again disappeared to that null space that Chukaku seemed to be able to draw upon at will. Good. My ears aren't what they used to be, so I had to be sure. Naruto felt a large drop of sweat gather by his brow before he suddenly looked around, a more intent look on his features. Sora. How is he? He noticed he was back in his room, the blinds closed for all the good they did at keeping out the irritating rays of light from the early morning. Oh, don't worry about that, Sora's fine. In fact, he woke up a few hours before you did. I believe he's out training right now. Naruto blinked in surprise at that. He didn't know what was going on with Sora, but it seemed serious. Just how long had the two been out? As if sensing Naruto's thoughts exactly, Chukaku gave a small chuckle as he gestured towards the wall clock, proudly displaying that it was around midday. Don't worry, boy, you were only out for the night. Both you boys didn't have a scratch on you after a few hours. Again Naruto blinked in surprise. He was no medic, but he was sure wounds like they had weren't supposed to heal that quickly. Wait, training. Chukaku just hummed out a yes as he bobbed his head once in the affirmative as the blonde took the opportunity to pull himself up into a Caesar position. Shouldn't he be resting or something? The older monk merely gave a knowing smile as he looked out the window, listening out for the usual sounds of the bird's song as well as the rhythmic tapping of the shishi-odoshi. He was rather insistent. I believe he had some issues to work out, and nothing beats some hardy exercise to clear one's head. Naruto frowned at the word issues. Usually Sora would come to him if he had problems and vice versa. They were supposed to be friends. Speaking of which, Naruto suddenly had a thought as he remembered back on his strange encounter with the Kyuubi. It felt far too real to be a dream, but he didn't know what to make of it. Master. Chukaku only raised a brow as a single eye glanced in his direction, but Naruto had known him long enough to know that meant he was listening. I had a strange dream while I was unconscious. There was this strange place full of corridors and pipes that I was wandering through, and then there was this giant room with a huge cage. At the mention of a cave, Naruto suddenly found himself at the full attention of the head monk. And did you see what was behind the cage? Naruto blinked in surprise. It almost looked like Chukaku was taking what Naruto said seriously. Yeah. At first it was just some big eyes and teeth, but when I left I caught a glimpse of it. It was a massive orange fox that called itself the Kyuubi. Naruto was shocked to see Chukaku's eyes open in surprise. He had never seen the head monk's eyes open before. You say it referred to itself, as in you talked with it? Naruto nodded nervously as the old monk turned away, once again looking out of the window. However, this time he wasn't truly looking. Naruto could tell his thoughts were elsewhere. But it was just a dream, right, master? Chukaku took a quick glance at the boy, noting his nervous and insecure expression. It was so alien on Naruto's usually exuberant and confident face. Finally the man let out a sigh that really carried his age as he slowly got to his feet on aching knees. Naruto, come to my study in a few minutes. There's something I need to talk with you about. But first I must go get Sora. There is something you both need to know. And without further ceremony the old monk just left, leaving a highly confused blonde in his wake as he quickly made his way towards the training grounds. Naruto, Sora, this is going to be very hard for you to hear, and honestly, I feel it is too early for me to tell you these things. However, I believe that should I not explain them now, you will be forced to live in confusion later on. Both Naruto and Sora were sitting in Chukaku's study, the only other room in the temple besides the library that actually had chairs. Even then they were only moderately more comfortable than the floor. Chukaku himself sat behind a fairly plain wooden desk that was built for function rather than beauty. The elderly man took a deep breath with his eyes closed in thought before catching both boys' eyes. You both know of the attack 8 years ago on Konohagakure. After getting two slightly unsure nods he continued. It may not have been spoken about much in Konoha, but it was hardly secret. But before I explain that, you must first know about the Bayou. He waited a moment, but sure enough the two boys looked confused at what he said. Nobody knows quite where they came from or even what they truly want, but we do know they are powerful. There are 9 of them in total, each marked by the number of their tails. He saw a glint of recognition in Naruto's eyes, but he quickly silenced any query with a wave of his hand. They are enormous constructs of chakra given form and life, and if I can trust a certain source of information, intelligence. The thing that attacked Konoha those 8 years ago was the Kyuubi no Kitsune, the most powerful of the 9 Bayou. Its motives were unknown, but in the end it destroyed over half the village before it was defeated at the cost of the Yondaime Hokage's life. Except chakra is energy, and like all energy it cannot be destroyed, only moved or changed, so in essence it is impossible to truly kill a Bayou. At best it would simply reform as the consciousness pulled its physical form back together. He waited to see if the boys were following him, and after seeing they understood so far he continued. That's why over the years human began to seal Bayou away like one might a kunai into a scroll. They feared the power the creatures possessed, and aside from a select few with abilities strong enough to control or subdue the Bayou, it was the only way. Unfortunately it is not that simple. People quickly found that something as powerful as a Bayou could not be contained in any mere object. Even the most powerful sealing items paled in comparison to the most powerful of the 9. Instead a new way was discovered. The creatures could be contained within a living human vessel, a host and prison to the creature's consciousness and power. Of course not soon after that people found ways to weaponize these sacrificial vessels, and the Jinchuriki were created. He sighed sadly as he looked back down at the two boys. Is anything clearer now? He felt a tug at his heart as he saw Naruto looking down at the desk, his eyes shadowed by his unruly hair. Sora on the other hand just seemed confused, looking at his friend curiously as his gaze alternated between the blonde and the elderly monk. I don't understand, why are you telling us this? Surprisingly it wasn't Chukaku who gave him his answer but Naruto, his head still lowered. Because we're Jinchuriki. He looked up finally, his brow furrowed in a frown but his eyes sharp and attentive. Aren't we? He stated it as such, but the tone of his voice made it clear it wasn't really a question. Chukaku sighed deeply. People didn't give Naruto enough credit. He was really much sharper than he appeared. Not quite. Naruto, you're a Jinchuriki, and from what you told me about your dream, I would say you contain the nine-tailed fox that attacked Konoha. It was most likely sealed into you by the fourth Hokage in order to stop the creature's rampage. Seeing Naruto's head dip back down, he turned to Sora, who continued to look around confusedly, completely lost. Sora, on the other hand, is a rather unique case. He cannot have a Beiyu inside of him, as they are all currently accounted for in their various villages. However, he certainly has the chakra of one within him. Even Naruto looked up at that, confused by what the elderly monk meant. I believe somebody gathered up the chakra expelled by the Kyuubi on the night of its attack before sealing it directly into Sora, making him somewhat of a pseudo-Jinchuriki. That was what that incident was, Sora tapping into the power sealed within him. Unfortunately, as you witnessed, the chakra of a Beiyu is immensely potent and so intertwined with its consciousness that it can hold their will, even after separation from the creature itself. The Kyuubi is known for being a beast of hatred and rage. It is no surprise that its chakra contains those same dark intents and is no doubt drawn upon when the user is in sync with such emotion. Naruto looked up at that, looking around at his friend, who this time was the one to dip his head. It's a great power, but also a great burden. However, just like with any ability or technique, with enough patience and practice. I don't want it. Chukaku and Naruto looked around at Sora in shock. He had stood up from his seat, allowing the wooden chair to clatter to the ground. His chest was heaving and his eyes were brimming with tears. For a second, Chukaku could have sworn he saw a flicker of red enter his eyes. I never asked for this power. Get it out of me. His shoulders suddenly slumped as he felt all the anger leak out of him. He looked around to see Naruto gently holding his sleeve. He didn't know why, but it felt like that single touch was all that was stopping him just storming out the room. It was calming. Unfortunately, Sora, there has never been a method of safely extracting Beiyu chakra once it has been sealed into a host. He looked thoughtful for a moment, only half noticing Sora's angry, yet dejected face. On the other hand, like I said, you are a unique case. Perhaps if we... I'll do it. Chukaku sighed, wondering when it became so commonplace for people to interrupt him mid-sentence. He looked over at the young blonde, a mask of pure determination set on his features as he looked at Sora. I'll find a way to help you, even if I have to take on your burden myself. Sora was simply shocked. He knew Naruto was his friend, but he never expected such a passionate response. A small grateful smile appeared on his face as he pulled Naruto into a grateful embrace. Thank you, Naruto. I can really count on you always, can't I? Naruto simply nodded, the determination in his eyes never wavering. Finally, the two broke apart when they heard a loud and very intentional coughing. Sheepishly, they turned to look at the head monk, who had his arms crossed and a single eyebrow raised. As I was saying, he tilted his head slightly, waiting for an interruption. When none came, he smiled serenely before continuing. There may be a way yet. He turned towards Naruto with an intensive expression which made the small boy slightly nervous. Naruto, you did something while Sora was under the influence of the fox's chakra. None of the monks had ever seen anything like it. It was almost as if you were drawing the chakra right off of him and into yourself. You even healed as you were doing it. Naruto just blinked in surprise before looking up and rubbing the back of his head. I did. I don't remember that. All I remember is holding on to Sora and wishing that he would just stop. I didn't want to see him that way, covered by that foul chakra. Chukaku's other eyebrow joined his first momentarily before a similarly thoughtful expression appeared on his own face. Naruto, I want you to do something for me. The blonde just nodded quickly. He had long since stopped questioning the head monk's orders, even though he never phrased them as such. Touch my arm and think back to that moment, like when you first started to train in your gravity manipulation. Naruto seemed confused and unsure, but nevertheless he grabbed a hold of the old man's arm and began to think back. Like everything in the past year, he could easily conjure up the memories of the previous night. As the sight of red chakra and the acrid smell of smoke along with the desperation and sadness filled his recollection, he began to feel a strange pull from the contact with Chukaku. Likewise, the elderly monk looked at his arm in amazement. He could quite clearly feel his chakra being siphoned off into Naruto at a rather substantial pace. If he didn't have as much chakra as he did, only rivaled by Chiriku and unknowingly Naruto in the temple, he might have been worried. Like that time a year ago Naruto suddenly found words that weren't his own leaving his lips, that same instinctual feeling filling him up. Preta path. Chukaku's eyes widened in amazement as he felt the rate his chakra was being drawn in substantially increase. He quickly pulled his arm out of Naruto's grip and thankfully he felt the process stop, but he suddenly felt quite tired, like he had spent a few hours training. Naruto on the other hand looked incredibly refreshed, the slight bags under his eyes from fitful sleep vanishing. Sora had watched the whole ordeal with a curious gaze before mumbling something about blondes getting all the luck. Well, that was interesting. Naruto looked up at the old monk expectantly, as if waiting for some kind of explanation for what just happened. After a moment of thought Chukaku nodded, seemingly to himself, before looking back down. You said, Preta path, Naruto, was it like what you told me about the names of those gravity techniques? After a quick nod Chukaku hummed again. Perhaps this is one of the 6 paths that gave the sage his name, which might make those gravity techniques another. Almost on reflex Naruto once again found another set of phantom words pass through his mind. Deva path. Chukaku and Sora blinked at Naruto as the blonde looked sheepishly away. I think it's the Deva path. Chukaku blinked one more time before standing up and moving over to the window. Interesting, that means there are 4 more you have yet to discover. He looked back around and for a moment Naruto was reminded of the times he had spoken with his Gigi, the two had the same look. Only time will tell if you will discover them or not, but I'm sure if you do, you will master them. He sighed, wishing he had a pipe to draw upon, but he had given up that habit years ago to support the clean body ideal the temple upheld. For now though I believe that is enough. Too much information in one sitting can be as bad as anything in excess. Get some food, we have plenty of time to figure things out. He watched as the 2 boys stood, bowed and left the room, bickering almost as soon as their feet landed outside his door. So you held me, huh? Sora had a mischievous smirk on his face as Naruto froze with his face flush with embarrassment. Gah, you're just jealous I had to be the one to save you. Sora never lost his haughty expression even as he began laughing, on hand on Naruto's shoulder as the 2 walked further away from the study. Chukaku watched them go with a fond smile, glad that even this experience had done nothing to dampen their spirits and their friendship. It was rare to see a bond so strong, especially one that held against hardships like these. The next few months flew by very quickly for Naruto. He had made a promise and he intended to keep it. He had wholeheartedly thrown himself into finding a way to free Sora of the burden inside of him. He now spent hours each day holed up in the library, poring over books, but that wasn't to say he neglected his training or other studies. He still made time to do everything, although he now found his day very tightly packed. The other monks weren't too surprised. After all, he had once meditated for 3 days straight just to prove a point. Fuinjutsu had briefly caught his eye. It was what sealed the chakra into him and Sora in the first place, however that turned up a dead end. Learning and mastering sealing to that level required years of intense study. Time Naruto had, but he felt Sora did not. It wasn't obvious, but there were subtle signs that each day Sora was becoming more and more affected by Kyuubi's chakra. Brief flashes of unreasonable anger, his eyes flaring red occasionally, and worst of all, his arm. Sora's arm had always been a concern for him, but now it was permanently stuck in its more demonic form. What Naruto needed was time, or at least a way to decrease the time it would take him to learn Fuinjutsu, what he had thought was an impossibility. However, to his surprise, when he brought the matter to Chiriku, he had instantly thought of a solution, a technique known only to Konoha ninja, but shared with the Fire Temple due to them being affiliated. The Shadow Clone Technique. It seemed so perfect at first. Now Naruto could split his attention as much as he wanted, and all he would have to deal with was a small headache at the end of the day. In theory, with his chakra reserve, he should be able to create hundreds of clones that could all share their memories with him. Of course, things were never so simple for the blonde. As soon as he tried to create any clones, he ran into a problem, if you could call it that. It turned out that due to the clones having Rinnegan eyes as well, Naruto shared his vision with them and them with him. It had certainly been a surreal experience for the blonde to suddenly find himself staring in about 100 different directions at once, not to mention intensely confusing and painful. Right now he could only deal with his vision split 3 ways, but it was still very distracting. Chukaku theorized that with practice he could increase the amount of clones he could deal with, so each day he would spend about an hour just acclimatizing to it. He found out by accident as a clone watched him spar with Sora that it gave him a unique advantage in that a single clone could cover his blind spots while three could practically eliminate them entirely, and all they had to do was sit still and watch. Of course they were fragile, and once Sora realized what he was doing he quickly went about destroying them as soon as possible. Luckily with Naruto's incredible reserves it was fairly simple to just remake them once popped. Sora too had learned the shadow clone technique, and thanks to his own demonic chakra which gave him substantial reserves, if not comparable with Naruto's or any other Jinchuriki, he quickly made good use of them. He did not suffer from the same problems Naruto did, although they found the mental exhaustion was much more taxing on him, limiting him to how many clones he could make a day. Still, it allowed him to study inside with clones while meditating or training outside, freeing up some of his day. However, with pretty much all of Naruto's day taken up, Sora found himself with a lot of free time. Of course every problem has a solution in time, and while picking up after Naruto in the library he became interested by a book on sealing and had taken up learning the art. He of course made liberal use of shadow clones in the process, but pretty soon he was impressing the other monks by drawing out various simple barrier and strengthening seals. Naruto on the other hand was looking down different avenues, namely his dujutsu. He had thrown himself into trying to understand his elusive eyes, relentlessly training his Deva and Preta path. Strangely he had found that the Preta path was not simply the ability to absorb chakra as he had first thought, but direct it. In that way he could either pull it into his own body, or likewise push his own into someone else's, instantly adapting the chakra to its new body. He found he could even push chakra into the ground or inanimate objects, however it did little more than strengthen them, and if he pushed enough it, give them a blue glow. On another note, he had also spent time researching the sage himself, hoping to gain insight into his powers and perhaps hints on potential abilities. Apart from the more outlandish things like the myth about the moon, there was barely any information on the man himself, just like all information on that period in history. Naruto couldn't even figure out exactly when the man had lived or where. The only useful information was that he had a number of special possessions that were now considered sacred in many places. Once again he was surprised when he brought that information to Chukaku. The man had smiled but said nothing, instead leading Naruto deep underground the temple via passageways the young blonde didn't even knew existed. Finally they had reached a large vault where some of the more precious or sacred items the fire temple held in its possession were kept. There were even some treasures from the fire daimyo's personal collection that the man wanted protected and didn't want to use ninja. However, that wasn't the surprise. That came when Chukaku had shown him an old shakuju. It looked ordinary enough, but apparently it was said to have belonged to the sage himself. According to very ancient records, it was a gift to one of the man's closest friends who had later gone on to found the fire temple itself, becoming the first head monk. It was kept in the vault as it consumed massive amounts of chakra just by being held, killing an ordinary person in moments and an average Junin in about 10 minutes. Naruto had gone to pick it up, but Chukaku had held him back, telling him it wasn't the time for that just yet. So now Naruto was sitting in a field around the back of the living quarters. It was one of his favorite places to meditate as it held a small pond with a single stone at the center he could rest on. He was feeling for his chakra, examining its flow as it moved and slid through his pathways, sometimes quickly, other times like it wasn't even moving at all. He had been told by Chiraku he possessed incredible control over his chakra, especially for someone with reserves as large as his own. Once again Chukaku theorized it was to do with his Rinnegan. He had equated it to the chakra being a lumpy fluid and the Rinnegan being a kind of strainer. The lumpy fluid that was uncontrolled chakra moved through the pathways, sticking to the sides and causing friction which unbalanced the entire system. When it passed through his eyes it would be strained, becoming more fluid and less viscous. This way it would cause less friction and gave Naruto unparalleled control. At least that was the only way the head monk could explain it. He felt his chakra move around his stomach, close to his gate of view, when a small frown creased his brow for just a moment. There was a small, almost unnoticeable pull on his chakra in that area, draining it out of his pathways and into something else. He knew what it was, of course, the seal that held the kyubi within him. He thought about how easy it would be to simply pull back on that chakra, stop it from flowing into the seal. It would only take a single thought. Of course that would degrade the prison quickly, in no time releasing the kyubi's chakra within him in a way he was sure wouldn't be the most pleasant experience for him. However, he decided to focus on that, feeling the way his chakra was leached out, focusing intently on the seal and the way his own chakra moved through it. He could also feel the Kyuubi's chakra leaking into his own system, being almost immediately converted into a more usable form by both the seal and his Preta path, which he realized must have been working subconsciously since the Rinnegan had activated. Suddenly he felt a familiar tug on his mind that he hadn't felt in a few months. He succumbed to it, allowing his own consciousness to fall deep within himself. So you've returned. Naruto opened his eyes and sure enough he found himself back in the enormous room that represented the seal, the enormous bars before him and the Bayou beyond it. Kyuubi. Naruto gave a small inclination of his head before feeling a large gust of warm air blow over him as the great fox snorted contemptuously. No need for the pleasantries, Ninjan. Why have you come here, or do you enjoy flaunting your freedom before your prisoner? Naruto frowned at that as he took a seat on the floor, pulling his legs towards him to sit in a loose cross-legged pose. He couldn't quite see it, but the Kyuubi frowned at that in the darkness of his cell. It was a position he had seen many times over from one he would never see again. You know, I never asked to have you sealed inside of me. Again he felt the warm breath of the Kyuubi wash over him as the large fox snorted, this time in amusement. So you have come to whine about the injustice of your pathetic existence. How typical of your kind. Naruto didn't bat an eye. He had thought long and hard about the situation between him and his tenant and no longer feared the Kyuubi, at least as long as it was safely locked away within him. You speak as if you know humans. Deep in the darkness of the cell he saw a solitary red eye crack open, the slit pupil swiveling until it settled on his form. I know about your kind, far more than I care to remember, or even wish to. For a long time there was silence between the two, and when it was clear neither intended to speak, the great fox grunted in annoyance, its eye closing again. What happened? Again there was silence, this time it was almost palpable. The Kyuubi didn't move, but somehow Naruto felt all its attention was squarely on him. What happened to make you hate so much? Again a loud grunt echoed through the large cage, the bars trembling slightly as the mighty fox raised itself onto its paws. Slowly it lumbered over to the cage entrance, each step reverberating around the space and making the ground quake. Finally Naruto got a good look at the creature. Its orange fur glistened in the light that could now reach it, with black markings reaching up from around its eyes to its ears that seemed to belong more to a rabbit than a fox. 9 long tails swayed slowly in sync behind its giant body, each looking like they could take off the top of a mountain with an absent flick. Strangely, it had a rather humanoid torso with hands and arms instead of front paws. Other than that, it looked just like its title suggested, a large fox with 9 tails. Time, Ninjan, time happened. Time will produce more hatred in a being than any number of pitiful grudges or grievances, and I just happened to be cursed by the gift of immortality. Its large red eyes narrowed as it once again sunk onto its belly, the long tails wrapping almost protectively around its body. Why do you care to ask such pointless things, Ninjan? What could you possibly gain from it? A means to control me. Are you not satisfied with waiting for this accursed seal to finish siphoning away my chakra into you? Its gaze remained solely on the blonde, piercing him, awaiting the reply it already expected. I wish to understand you. It blinked once, a sight that might have been comical had the situation been different. That had not been the answer it had been expecting, and its eyes quickly narrowed again. Then you will fail, now be gone. Naruto once again felt the tug on his mind, however this time he was prepared. He resisted the pull and remained exactly where he was. The Kyuubi had gotten up to return to its spot in the darkness, but when he felt he was not alone he turned back around. Why do you try my patience, Ninjan? Let me have my peace. However, Naruto didn't move, he didn't even blink. In fact, his eyes had been closed since the fox had begun speaking. Is that what you want? Peace. The Bayou stopped, its tail slowly coming to rest behind it as the head turned. Red eyes searched Naruto's unmoving form, once again unnerved by the similarities it spotted between the two. Then why attack Konoha? Why harm people that you find so insignificant? What did you have to gain? Surprisingly, Naruto heard growling within the cage, and when he opened his eyes he found the face of the Kyuubi uncomfortably close to the bars of the cage, its lips bared to show its enormous teeth. Do not try me, Ninjan. I have no reason to explain myself to you or any of your wretched kind. Continue to irritate me and I will make sure that when I claw my way out of this cursed seal it is the single most agonizing moment in your short, pathetic life. It finished with an almost dismissive flick of its tails as it raised its head high up above Naruto, the boy almost losing the Bayou in the darkness of the cell. Now I said leave. Again Naruto felt the tug, but it was much stronger than before. He was unable to resist and he was forcibly ejected from the seal. When it was finally satisfied it was alone again, the fox retreated back into the cage, far into the darkness where it couldn't even see itself, and the entrance was a mere pinprick of light. It curled up around itself, its 9 tails wrapping around its form as it went to sleep, a frown on its brow. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.